Good morning. It's Monday, September 29th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 724 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back to the FDD Morning Brief. Happy belated Snapback Day to all who celebrate. I know I'm celebrating because after more than a decade of facade and farce, we're basically all on the same page now. We being the world, if that wasn't clear. Back in 2013, the Islamic Republic of Iran pretended it wasn't angling for a nuke, and the world pretended to believe it. That insanity extended into 2015 when U.S. President Barack Obama locked in the most dangerous nuclear deal the world has ever seen. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, released Iran from the grip of crippling sanctions in exchange for vague promises that the regime was never going to honor. But there was one catch. The sanctions could snap back. And indeed, they have. A decade later, the world powers finally woke the hell up. Better late than never. But imagine if the Israelis didn't launch that preemptive war against Iran back in June. Iran, if Trump didn't order military strikes on those 3 nuclear facilities. We dodged a bullet, folks. And now the Iranian regime is back in the doghouse where it belongs. Here's hoping we can keep it that way. Today's guest is Edmund Fitton-Brown. He previously served as the UK's ambassador to Yemen and as coordinator of the UN Security Council's sanctions monitoring team for the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, and the Taliban. That makes him an actual expert in global counterterrorism. He speaks Arabic, Finnish, and Italian. Oh yeah, and he speaks English with an awesome British accent. These days, he's a senior fellow here at our shop here at FDD, and he's just getting going. He's going to be joining us in just a few minutes to talk about a wide range of issues, so please do stick around. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has a big day today. He's meeting Donald Trump here in Washington, but it might get funky. Trump has a 21-point plan to end the war in Gaza, and I'm not sure Bibi loves all of it. 21 points is too many to explain, so let me sum up. Points 1 through 5 provide an immediate end to the fighting, the release of every hostage, the release of thousands of hardened Palestinian prisoners, a surge of humanitarian aid into Gaza, the closure of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and a pardon for Hamas members if they disarm and leave Gaza. Some sort of Arab international force would collect Hamas's weapons. Hamas is definitely not going to like this. But wait, there's more. The plan outlines a governance structure for reconstruction plans for post-war Gaza. Hamas won't like that part either because Hamas is not part of the plan. It all sounds basically fine from the Israeli perspective until this next part, which will 100% be opposed by Bibi's right-wing coalition. Trump's plan includes a pledge from the United States to guarantee that Israel won't annex any part of the West Bank. Israel and the Palestinian Authority also need to commit to negotiating the two-state solution again. Bibi will definitely chafe at this last point. Is this plan perfect? No. But could it end the war? You're darn tootin' it could. Now, the Israelis, Hamas, Iran, Turkey, and Qatar all just have to agree. What could possibly go wrong? Now for your headlines. Headline 1, U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, will soon visit Egypt. The dates of Huckabee's visit have not yet been announced. Once in Cairo, Huckabee is expected to meet with senior Egyptian officials to talk about Gaza. According to reports, Huckabee is going to speak with the Egyptians about the 21-point plan for Gaza. That's the easy part, believe it or not. Here's the hard part. Huckabee is also expected to talk about Egypt-Israel relations. And right now, those relations are not great. Despite the 1979 peace treaty, ties are downright cold. The Egyptians are arming up. In the Sinai, their anti-Israel rhetoric is at a fever pitch, and things only seem to be getting worse. A sitting U.S. ambassador to Israel has not paid an official visit to Egypt in decades, and I think this is the right time. More concerted U.S. engagement with Egypt to foster better ties with Israel, that's long overdue. Headline 2, the mayor of Gaza City reportedly sent a letter to President Donald Trump. The letter to the Donald has over a dozen signatures from business and academic leaders in the coastal enclave. Now, before I proceed, let me remind you that Gaza City's mayor, like pretty much everybody, all the officials in Gaza, is affiliated with Hamas. That's the subtext. Now for the actual text. The letter is an appeal to President Trump to end the war in Gaza, which he wants to do already, right? These guys laid it on pretty thick. The letter appeals to President Trump's knack for deal making and reminds Trump that he has a opportunity to go down in the history books, not only as the president of the United States, but as a humanitarian hero. The letter says that the people of Gaza will, quote, never forget the moment when Donald Trump brought life, hope, and dignity back to a place of despair, end quote. Okay. All right. Headline 3, another Houthi missile fired at Israel, to Yemen, another Israeli interception, and then some more. The fight continues, including reports of a missile last night that may have been armed with cluster munitions. The Houthis, man, they keep piling it on. There really doesn't seem to be much of an end in sight to this battle. The Israelis are definitely getting a better handle on the intelligence they need to neutralize the group in Yemen, but these guys are 1,300 miles away from one another. Every Israeli operation is a heavy lift and a major risk too. As I see it, there are probably 3 ways that this thing ends. One is that Hamas and Israel agree to a ceasefire. Not likely, but possible. Another is if Israel destroys Hamas and the fighting comes to an end. Also a tough lift. The other is if Israel finds Abdul Malik al-Houthi and they just take him out in his bunker. That's what Israel did with Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah. Have you heard much noise out of Lebanon lately? No, I didn't think you had. All right, it's time now for my interview with Edmund Fitton-Brown. He appeared once before he joined FDD on this program. Now he's a repeat offender and an FDD employee. So it's going to be fun. Let's welcome him onto the program. Welcome to the FDD Morning Brief, Edmund Fitton-Brown.
Thanks, John. It's great to be back on.
All right, good to have you. Let's start with the UN. We just wrapped up another messy General Assembly session in New York. You actually worked for that godforsaken cesspool. So maybe you can tell us what the hell is wrong with the United Nations?
Well, I think the UN has been in a state of decline for a long time, and it's had many faults, of course, throughout its existence. But I think to some degree, we've made things worse because we've stopped paying attention in the UN. I always used to observe that the UK and the US were very, very strong missions in the UN and would do a lot to make sure that some of the children in the room did not get completely out of hand. I think there has been a period over the last decade or so where, because we've become frustrated with the UN, and also in the case of the UK, because of other distractions, there's been a reduced performance, I think, of the missions in New York. But that, in a way, that's a sort of a sideshow. The question is, why is the UN so fundamentally in a mess? And I think it goes down to the General Assembly. And of course, we've just seen the General Assembly, at its worst over the last week or so. You've got all of the nations in the world there, and that brings everything down to the lowest common denominator. You've got this endless persecution of Israel, and that's purely a numbers game. You've got one Jewish state, and then you've got all of these Arab and Islamic states, and then all of these fellow travelers as well. And the one thing they can sort of feel good about is sort of beating on Israel. And that makes the General Assembly a really obnoxious talking shop. The Security Council is better. The Security Council, thank goodness, is the only organization where their resolutions have legal effect. And because the US, the UK, France have a veto in the Security Council, even when there is a bad resolution, it doesn't get through. So that's something. The other side of this is all of the various organs of the UN and its agencies. And some of those have gone absolutely insane in terms of the Middle East. So you've got the UN UNRWA, as people call it, the Palestine Refugees Agency, effectively, which actually participated in the 7th of October attacks. You've got UNIFIL in Lebanon, which completely failed to stop Hezbollah from positioning itself on the Israeli northern border. You've got the various UN activities in Yemen, which have completely failed to prevent the Houthis from running riot in the Red Sea and also taking UN people hostage. And then you've got this insanity, the UN Human Rights Council, and the people that it appoints, including the ones who accused Israel of genocide recently, and including Francesca Albanese. So the only thing we can do really is get the United States to take a more muscular approach to forcing the UN to cut down these extraneous missions.
Yeah, and I don't know how close we are to that, but I do think that Donald Trump's speech laid out a little bit of what could come if he decides to follow up. But I definitely see the tyranny of the majority at play here in the UN. It's really disgusting. I want to talk about the Palestinian state issue that just dominated the agenda for the past couple of weeks. What do you make of all of that?
So this has been very disappointing for me because, again, I worry that the adults in the room I mentioned earlier, which have usually included the United Kingdom and sometimes France, both France and the United Kingdom were completely delinquent in this. They decided to go down the track of recognition of Palestine. They got a lot of encouragement to do that. I'm afraid to say that a lot of former British ambassadors from the Middle East were in favor of it. I was arguing against it, but I was in a small minority in that respect. Retired British military were much more on board with saying, no, Palestinian recognition is a mistake. Anyway, unfortunately, Keir Starmer went completely crazy on this one because not only did he decide that he wanted to go down this track to appease a certain limited constituency of voters. This is really what this is about. This is an unpopular government that is chasing likes. But he also set conditions that only affected Israel. Basically said, unless the situation improves dramatically in Gaza by September, then we will recognize. He didn't set any conditions on Hamas, and there was no condition related to the release of hostages. So effectively, he handed Hamas the opportunity to make sure nothing improved, and that was an incentive not to release hostages. And they duly obliged. And of course, you'll have seen that a number of senior Americans, including Marco Rubio, actually said that the British and French announcement of their plan to recognize the state of Palestine had sabotaged and undermined the talks leading towards a ceasefire and hostage release.
Yeah. So I need to ask you, bottom line, let's spell this out for people who maybe don't understand the nuance of all of this. What did Starmer gain from all of this? This seemed like he was sticking his neck out. He did. It feels ridiculous. He's not going to accomplish anything. He knows that he wasn't because it was going to get rejected by the U.S. at the Security Council if it even got that far. So why do this if you're Keir Starmer?
So he's looking for some kind of balance. He's probably listening to his special political advisors. And, you've got things like the proscription of Action Palestine and things of that kind. And he's sort of saying, well, on the one hand, we've done that to support Israel or to oppose the Houthis or whatever. On the other hand, we're doing this to sort of be fair to the Palestinians. I think he had some idea that would somehow gain him votes. Of course, a recent poll shows that he's now the most unpopular British Prime Minister in recent years. So it just hasn't worked.
Yeah, it hasn't. Really disappointing and really not what you'd expect from the UK. That transatlantic partnership seems to falter right here as it relates to the Palestinian issue. All right, but let me ask you something totally different. I want to ask you about Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara appearing at the UN. Used to work international sanctions at the United Nations, Al-Qaeda sanctions, in fact. So how did you feel seeing a former senior Al-Qaeda leader standing up at that lectern at Turtle Bay? Are we all taking a huge risk here by normalizing him on the world stage?
Yeah, this is a fascinating development. It was one of the three sort of big things that were going on both in the UN and in the background last week. You already mentioned the Palestine recognition issue, and then obviously the third one was all of the progress towards snapback on Iran. But Syria was another big one, and this is an interesting one. I like to take it back to the question of how pleased were we when Assad fell? And most of us were pleased when Assad fell. I think most of us felt that Syria under Assad was going nowhere, that it was a sort of a hopeless situation. You could never have Syria recover. You could never have reconstruction. You could never have stabilization of any kind. So it was a good thing that Assad fell. And that then leaves you with this new challenge. So Syria is handed back to its Sunni Muslim majority. But does the representative of that majority then do anything good? Now, if you go back to Ahmad al-Shara's background, as you say, as a sanctioned al-Qaeda terrorist, and indeed previously Islamic State before he was al-Qaeda, that's troubling, very troubling. But he did break with al-Qaeda, he broke with Islamic State, and he embarked on a sort of a PR campaign to try to rehabilitate al-Nusra Front or HTS long before they were successful in taking over Syria. So that sort of opened up an interesting prospect. Can you have a reformable former terrorist? And then all of a sudden, earlier this year, we are presented with the reality. There he is. He's the de facto leader of Syria. What happens now? Well, he's done things, or at least he's said some good things. He's talked about the importance of inclusive government, protection of minorities. We have no quarrel with anyone. We seek war with no one. We don't seek war with Israel. There's been some apparent progress towards a security agreement between Syria and Israel, but it remains to be seen whether that's really going to happen. But we've also seen some bad stuff go on. We've seen the suppression of the Alawites, and then of the Druze as well, some very dubious double dealing over the Kurds, which looks to me like appeasement of Turkish oppression of the Kurds. And of course, if he goes down those tracks, then he will fail. He will fail for sure, because Syria is so much about its minorities that an overbearing majority is just going to be embroiled in constant conflict. And so the question is he going to follow his good angels or follow his demons? Now, it's clear that President Trump has decided that he wants to go with this. He wants to see what can be achieved with this guy. He said some very nice things about him. And the question is, can that close embrace influence Shara in the right direction? Because the message he needs to hear is that real bravery in leading Syria out of conflict will be very risky, but choking on it and trying to hedge is actually more risky. That's guaranteed failure. And guaranteed failure in these circumstances is going to be death.
Yeah, and it is like a high wire act that we're watching in real time. I got to say, this stresses me out. I don't like the idea of a self-declared former jihadist running a country, getting the platform at the UN, and kind of deciding in real time whether he wants to murder minorities in his own country. This does not give me warm and fuzzies. I'm kind of glad to hear a former British diplomat who worked on sanctions and al-Qaeda issues kind of read back to me kind of what I've been feeling. So thank you for validating my concerns. I don't know if I needed them validated, but I definitely feel better having gotten them validated. So thank you. I was just talking about the Houthis in the headlines, and I know you spent some serious time in Yemen as the former UK ambassador. I laid out 3 ways this war might finally end, but it certainly doesn't look like the world is willing to lift a finger here as it relates to the Houthis. So that probably means it's on Israel to end this in some shape or form. Am I missing something here?
Well, let me add a couple of thoughts to this. You talked about the possibility of decapitation with Abdul Malik al-Houthi, and that obviously is something the Israelis will do if they can. And who would bet against them on the basis of the last couple of years? So that's a possibility. And he's run the Houthis for 20 years, and he's a highly effective tactician. He's charismatic. He has unchallenged authority in the group. So that might be a decapitation that would have real impact. So that's an interesting one. I think there are 2 other things that we should at least mention. One is that the Iranians are, they are in the end the Houthis' main suppliers, main supporters. And the Houthis, although they don't exactly take instructions from Tehran, they are nevertheless they are trying to position themselves as the leading Iranian proxy. They want to be the ones who are really sticking it to the Israelis and to the West. And they are doing this to a large degree on behalf of the Iranians, although they're doing it for their own reasons too. Now, the question is, what would it do to the Houthis if the Iranians withdrew their support, or if the Iranians said to the Houthis, you have got to stop doing what you're doing? Because if the West, and let's say by this I really mean the United States, because Israel has already done its best in Iran, it may have to do it again, but there's a limit to what Israel can do. But if the United States is drawn back into maximizing pressure on Iran, including possibly kinetic activity, then the Iranians may feel that they are at existential risk. And they may feel that then, remember that President Trump did say he would hold Iran responsible for everything that the Houthis did. So that is one possible avenue. It's not an easy one. And the other one is, you said the world isn't prepared to lift a finger. Not unless the US leads it. If the US leads it and looks at the possibility of ramping up support to the internationally recognized government of Yemen and the Southern Transitional People in the south, then you can put more real pressure on the Houthis on the ground in Yemen, and particularly on the Red Sea coast.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not sure I see the U.S. taking any real action. You had that engagement by the Trump administration. There was the military operations against the Houthis. And then there was the unilateral withdrawal from the theater. And I haven't really seen the U.S. holding the Houthis to account. In fact, I can't even remember the last time there was a statement issued by the U.S. government about the aggression by the Houthis. It's almost as if this is just happening and everybody's just kind of whistling past the graveyard. So I'm not sure I see the U.S. getting involved here, which does bring me back to, I think, what the Israelis are angling for, which is that one kill stroke, right? That one attack on Abdul Malik al-Houthi. I think he's been in power, since 2006, if I'm not mistaken. That's a long time. He is the longtime leader. Reminds us a lot of Hassan Nasrallah or maybe Yahya Sinwar, right? These are the kind of debilitating strikes that the Israelis are known for. The question is the intelligence at this point. And I think that's what the Israelis are angling for right now in Sana'a. Whether they get there or not, I guess, remains to be seen. We're going to leave it there. Edmund Fitton-Brown, thank you for joining us today as an FDD employee, no less, on the FDD Morning Brief.
Thanks, John.
All right, good to have that guy aboard. Here's what FDD has on tap for you today. FDD's Mark Montgomery and Max Lesser published an insight on our website highlighting how Russia, China, and Iran are all waging foreign malign influence campaigns against the United States. At the same time, the federal government is downsizing the agencies responsible for combating this threat. Yikes. Mark and Max spotlight 5 different recent examples of foreign malign influence campaigns happening right now. So I got to ask, why are we downsizing? Right. My colleagues Sinan Jidi and Ahmad Sharawi published an article in the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune analyzing Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's decision in 2015 to shift his focus in Syria from fighting Bashar al-Assad to fighting the Kurds. Ahmad and Sinan explain that Erdogan's new Syria policy was rooted in domestic politics, and it was focused on preventing the emergence of Kurdish-controlled territory along Syria's border with Turkey. However, Erdogan failed to weaken Syria's Kurdish forces, and ultimately, the Assad regime did fall. A master strategist, Erdogan is not. Finally, FDD's Natalie Cano is out with a new foreign policy brief on our website, tracking Qatar's investments in Canada, from critical minerals to offshore drilling rights to academia. Qatari money is spreading across the Great White North. It's particularly concerning in Canada because Ottawa doesn't have transparency laws on the books. They don't know how to track this. So Qatar's reach is unknown. Natalie urges Ottawa to strengthen foreign influence and foreign funding legislation and to do so post-haste before it's too late. All right, stick a fork in it, folks, because this episode is done. If you're craving more think tank smartness, check out the expert analysis on our website, fdd.org, and catch us across social media. And yes, you can still make that generous tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Wednesday for another episode of the FDD Morning Brief. We're going to break down Bibi's White House visit and who knows what else. I'm still getting over a mild case of the Ebola virus, so apologies for the occasional cough or sniffle, but I am getting better. Until then, until next time, I'm Jonathan Schanzer, coughing slightly and signing off for FDD.